Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Queerness Diaries. So today I'm joined by Neil Hudson-Basing. How are you today, Neil?
I'm good, thanks, Connor. Great to see you, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on as well, because I know we've spoken a little bit on LinkedIn, and I've been to in back in June. I was back in the We Create Space for the Pride Gala, and so since then I've sort of got to know quite a few people from there. And so seeing your profile and everything on LinkedIn, I can't remember how I found your profile, but somehow I came across it and I was like, oh, yeah, I want to get him on the podcast at some point.
Well, I'm so grateful. It was such an amazing event, the We Create
Yeah.
Space Gala and Awards. Just to see so many people. It was great for me being the London events manager for We Create Space to get to know the Barcelona community and so
Yeah.
many queer leaders from across Spain. But it was just an amazing event, bringing so many wonderful people together, like yourself. And yeah, it was phenomenal.
Yeah, it was so awesome. And that's what I love with these events. You get to meet so many people that, especially for me, I was someone until this year. I'm not sure if it was starting podcasting or whatever it was, but I kind of, I guess being new in Barcelona as well, I sort of started pushing myself to go to a lot of these events. So I think We Create Space does a really great job at doing these really inclusive events and bringing a community together. And you get to meet so many amazing people from,
You really do. And I always say this, I talk about this whenever I'm kind of hosting a We Create Space event in London and recently in Barcelona, is that I used to walk away from networking events feeling really drained
yeah,
because of the small talk and it being kind of quite superficial, quite transactional. And
yeah,
actually, what I've really valued since joining We Create Space back in November is that I walk away from those events feeling really invigorated and revived because you never
yeah,
know who you're going to meet. The conversations are great. And I often say I came to We Create Space because from an events perspective, I really liked what they were putting out there. But
yeah.
as a storyteller, and as someone that really values community and inclusion, I wanted in on the action. So yeah, it's wonderful to hear that what we're putting out there is having that impact, and yeah, wonderful to have you as part of the community.
Yeah, I think it's super awesome as well because I definitely think in the last few years, especially since COVID, like everyone's been sort of yearning for some sort of connection again, but it left all of us a little bit, messed up in some way. And so to be able to come together again as a community after a few years of just feeling I definitely felt a few years, sort of like in a bubble on like the apps and going back into integrating into society almost was a bit nerve-wracking sometimes. So these events, everyone feels so positive, so warm, so welcoming. And online, often nowadays it can feel very robotic with how things are with all the apps. And so it's so great to always meet people at these events and feel like you've built like some really great connections. So I always encourage everyone to go. And Barcelona has so many great events like that.
Oh,
I'm
it
sure
does.
London too.
I do get, well, I get really envious of the events in Barcelona. And not that the events in London are not great, because they are, and we have a fantastic community, amazing queer community, and a DEI community as well for people working in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the events in Barcelona, like I guess
Yeah.
because there's a bit less there's less competition when it comes to the sort of things on offer in
Yeah.
Barcelona. Like London, it can sometimes feel a little bit saturated with the kind of events that we do. So
Yeah.
Barcelona, there's just such a buzz around it. I loved meeting the Barcelona community. But I definitely feel resonate with you on what you said about it being nerve-wracking going back into the world. I actually loved the world of virtual events during lockdown. It helped me hone in on so many skills. I was a bit of a tech phobe before then. Um, but I also had that nervousness about going out, and actually, I found social situations quite draining afterwards. I definitely,
Yeah.
through lockdown, having spent time, by myself and less time around people, it changed the way that we socialize. It changed the way
Yeah.
that we
It's
were
so
able to
true.
interact with people. And I know a lot of people that have had to ease back in slowly into normal life. For me personally, and I know we're going to talk more about my story shortly, but it changed the essence of who
Yeah.
I was. I realized that actually I was someone who craved alone time after lockdown. I
Yeah.
couldn't socialize the way that I could, and I didn't, self-care and me time became not a nice to have, but an essential. So yeah, lockdown
Yeah.
really changed the essence of who I am and me now.
Yeah. I totally get that. And it's crazy that it's been 4 years, 4.5 years at this
What
point, but
what is happening with
I
time?
know.
What is it? It's
I
weird.
always see those memes on Instagram like 2019 was just 5 minutes ago. And
It feels like it. It doesn't feel real. It speeds up, and I'm in my early 40s now, and it just gets faster and faster. It's wild.
yeah, it's so true. And so, anyway, what I thought we'd do so, in terms of your queerness diary, so we're going to go back all the way to the beginning. So, starting off with young Neil. So, basically, through your childhood. So, if you can talk us through where you're from and how you grew up. And so, what were those sort of initial years like for you?
I mean, I struggle with this a little bit because there are times when I just can't really remember a lot
Yeah.
about my childhood, and I think that when we talk to anyone that has had kind of quite a bit of a tumultuous childhood when it comes to parents and custody issues, which I went through, and I know that you've had similar experiences with maybe not the custody side of things, but with parents that
Mm.
were not what they should be. Um, Sometimes your memories are blocked, and I know there's a lot
Yeah.
of theory around trauma and the impact that it has on your memory. For all intents and purposes, a lot of my early childhood memories are what I've t been told about myself. So I was
Yeah.
born in Essex, and mum and dad just fought a hell of a lot all through
Mm.
growing up until they separated. I was very young when that happened. And it was a very kind of like disturbed home.
Yeah.
I've been told that I would um cry a lot. Um
Yeah.
and unless I was with my dad and my nan. And that was very much something that rang true throughout my life and my teenage years. I wanted to be around
Yeah.
my nan more than anything. I guess because she gave me a lot more stability and peace
Yeah.
than I had at home. Um, but I do remember little bits and pieces of who I was. So I grew up in Essex. Um, I grew up pretty consistently with one brother
Yeah.
that was from my mum and dad's marriage. But my dad had had a son from his first marriage, my older brother Stuart.
Yeah.
But didn't really have much to do with him because that was from his first marriage, and
Mm.
dad wasn't really present in his life, and to be honest still wasn't and has never really been, even though I have a good relationship with my brother. Me and Lee grew
Yeah.
up chalk and cheese, absolutely hated each other growing up. I was really quiet, which would surprise a lot of people now, right, that if I'm really
Yeah.
quiet, because I'm quite vocal, though as I say, and I've kind of discovered a more introverted side recently. um, and so it was I just remember it being a lot of custody battles, a lot of fighting,
Mm.
a lot of confusion. And, I talk a lot in the work that I do, in events, but also in DEI around that sense of belonging. And I think that I just never really had that sense of belonging because not only was I to and fro parents and such,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
also I didn't really feel like I fit in, right? And I never
Yeah.
have. And there are certain situations where I still never do. And I think as queer kids, we know that we're different. I'm
Yeah.
a podcast host as well, and I interview queer people, and it's something that comes up so much is we know we're
Yeah.
different. We just
So
don't have the
true.
language for it. And
Yeah.
so if we just go back to Little Neil, I was so weird, in the best way. I was really creative. I loved drawing. I loved dress up. The crazy shit that
Mm.
I used to get up to in my imaginary world with my
Yeah.
toys. And do you know what? It's been a real relief lately as I settle into myself, as I hit my early 40s. I feel so much more comfortable with who I am.
Yeah.
Um, I've found a sense of belonging who I am, but more importantly, I've been able to tap back more and feel more like that little Neil from what I remember than I've
Yeah.
ever felt before. And that's been a real joy to kind of like find that fun, creative side. And not that I've not
Yeah.
fun, not been fun before, but just that kind of like, that hope and that really queer nature without the word queer being attached to gender or sexuality, just being
Yeah.
different and being able to own that difference as well. There's an academic that I used to work with called J.F. Weeks, and he wrote a book called Growing Up in the Valleys about growing up as a Welsh kid. And he very much, when he looked back at his life, identified as queer without that, like, without those labels attached to it. And when I heard Jeffrey talk about that, it really resonated with my
Yeah.
own feelings about myself looking back. So that was Little Neil. And yeah, it was just pretty much kind of like custody battles right up until I was like 15, to be honest with you. So it
Yeah.
was tumultuous and pretty disturbing for a
Yeah.
large part. So although my dad raised me for the majority of that, and it was
Mm.
very much a loving my dad and my nan were able to give me a very loving, solid
Mm.
upbringing.
Yeah.
My mum on the other side kind of wanted us back and made several attempts for custody battles. And then when we did go back to live with my mum, which is when I was 11, teenage years, really 10, 11, really, really kind of formative years. What I ended up with was we ended up living in Lincolnshire, so quite far away from everything I'd known in Essex,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, into a home that was centered around fear and shame and a lot of abuse.
Yeah.
And so that was 4 years, and it just felt like when I look back at those 4 years, it felt like forever.
Yeah.
It just felt relentless, and I couldn't see an escape. And so I guess I went from being this quite happy creative kid, and although the custody battles and stuff were quite traumatic and upsetting, I went from being this, I was still very happy because, loving home and everything, through
Yeah.
to being quite a shadow of myself. And although I had great friends, home life was just, yeah, centered around fear, shame, a lot of bullying.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of having to grow up really quickly and be an adult, whether it was looking after my younger brother and sister. So my mum and had two children.
Yeah.
They're 9 and 10 years younger than me. Um, so a lot of it was centered around bringing them up and
Yeah.
looking after them. Why my mum and stepdad were not doing that is still to this day kind of beyond me. But really having to do way beyond what a teenager should be doing. And so
Yeah. Sure.
I eventually plucked up the courage to say to one of my dad's girlfriends at the time, family, that I wasn't particularly happy. And this was when I was 15, so I'd been going through this for 4 years.
Yeah.
Um, and then so I came back to my dad's in the Christmas of, I think it was 1995 or six, I can't remember. And I was 15, so it would have been 96. And I never went back to Lincolnshire. I just never went
Yeah.
back. My dad kept us, and we ended up going back to live with my dad. And that was my escape.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was pretty traumatic. And I think that definitely kind of like fed into my mental health later. And probably still does to a point, though I'm a pretty self-aware person. So I'm
Yeah.
able to pinpoint where things have affected me and not. But definitely for the next few years afterwards, there were periods of depression and such. And I've worked really fucking hard to get that in check.
Yeah.
But it wasn't easy. So that's a whistle stop tour of kind of like childhood to teenage Neil. I would say that my teenage years were probably quite tough because having gone from being in Lincolnshire in this bubble, I went to a small Christian school.
Yeah.
Um, so whilst it was a small school and I had great friends, the impact of religion was
Mm.
also a massive
Yeah.
impact because I'd been
Mm.
from growing up non-religious to being in a born-again Christian school,
Yeah.
and which I threw myself into. But then when I started to feel the negative effects of that, so not being able to listen to pop music and being very much vilified because of love of pop culture as a teenager, which was just weird, quite frankly. Through to we had a gay kid in our village, and we're still friends to this day, Fab.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
We were he was on the periphery of church life and stuff, and we were had to he was out and we had to pray
Yeah.
for him. Now I wasn't out at that time, but it was very much like, oh, we need to pray for him because he's going to hell. And I'm just like, "Oh, okay." And that was, I was realizing things in myself, always
Yeah.
knew I was different and started to fancy male pop stars. I'm not going to say who because it's embarrassing. But when you start to get those realizations, and then
Yeah,
so
for
I'm joining the
sure.
pieces together and I'm like, oh, hold on, we're praying for this guy because he's gay, but actually I think I am as well. So
Yeah.
that I had to carry a lot of shame around that, and I've never really carried any internalized homophobia since, and very much like,
Yeah.
although my coming out was quite a whirlwind, I never really carried much shame around it. I did try to hide it because I come from a very, very Essex family. And my dad's, a West Ham player, West Ham fan, and so is my brother, and it was all very scary. And I thought it would be much worse than it actually was. It wasn't easy,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. It was actually my mum that kicked up the most fuss about it. And but so there was a lot of stuff going on. There was the hypocrisy because we were involved in this religion that was very much meant to be centered around love and stuff. But actually, my home life was all very hypocritical and aggressive and abusive. So there was a lot of mismatches that I've had to work through over the years.
Yeah, I can imagine. And even from the aspect of, going to secondary school, normally we have, at least some of our friends, but completely moving region and go into an environment where you're in a new region, secondary school where you don't know really anyone, and also kind of having to grow up really fast and look after your siblings. That definitely must have, especially at the time, we don't realize because we just do what we do and we go through
Yeah.
the days. But later on, you think about it and it's like, oh damn, I was doing so much and growing up so fast.
Too
And
fast, way too fast. And
yeah,
that has an impact on me. I ended up leaving home at 17 because I was really independent. My independence literally gets the better of me all the time. Like I'm often too independent to ask for help, and and
yeah,
that had to change recently when I experienced severe burnout
yeah,
following a toxic work environment. Um, but yeah, I just had to grow up too fast. And when I left,
yeah,
and having to deal with situations that are way beyond your emotional intelligence as well and your
yeah,
capability. So when I left Lincolnshire at 15, I basically got cut off from all my friends. There was only a few friends that still spoke to me. So not
yeah,
only did I have to deal with leaving this small bubble,
yeah,
having already gone from my hometown where I'd grown up through to being in this small bubble, to then come back to Essex to the people that I had grown up with,
yeah.
but to then experience the worst bullying ever
Oh,
because I grew up in primary school. I grew up with all these kids. I didn't experience bullying in primary school. Yes, I knew that I was
yeah,
different. Yes, I had to often deal with things like many gay men do, like is like I'd have other kids in the street say, Mummy, is that a girl or a boy? And it would be really weird because I knew
mhm,
that there was something different about me. So, but
yeah,
I didn't experience bullying from my classmates. But when I then
mhm,
reappeared in Essex after 4 years of not going to the secondary school that everyone else went to then start a comprehensive secondary school from a
yeah,
small Christian school, to then experience the most horrendous bullying, all the homophobic insults, abuse, physical violence that you can expect, disgusting things like people
yeah,
spitting on my coat. And I did not know what the fucking hell was going on because I'd
yeah,
not only was I going through this whirlwind at home of having escaped this really
yeah,
abusive situation, I was then joining a new school
mm,
and experienced bullying, which I hadn't experienced before. And that bullying, I have to say, went on for years. Like, even though I was only at that secondary school for a year and a half, I then went to sixth form college, but still lived in the area. So would
yeah,
still get abuse from, because some of those people went to college, so would still get it through college. The difference
yeah.
is when I got to college, I found a bit more of a voice, and then I started to fight back a bit. And then people would start to leave me alone. because
Yeah.
because I wouldn't really take their shit. And over the years, I've calmed down a bit now, but I've put myself in some stupid situations, fighting and arguing back with people. Sometimes there
Yeah.
was no self-preservation. It would be like, what the fuck did you say to me? Um,
Yeah. Been there,
so
done that. Yeah.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
actually learn, or actually, and definitely as I've hit my 40s, like, mortality is kicking in, like the fear of
Yeah.
mortality, so I'm a lot more hesitant to not put myself in dangerous situations now. But I think those experiences of bullying at home at the hands of my mum and stepdad, as well as in the classroom and on the street, wherever I walk, and I live in London. It's actually not great for queer people in London to walk around if you're visibly queer. But it's definitely it ignited this fight back response in me that I've had to rein in sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely relate to that because I was kind of always the quiet goody two shoes since school, and
Same.
I don't know what happened as soon as I turned 16. So I grew up like my primary school was very much religious, and then in secondary school it wasn't. But in secondary school, um, some of my classmates, came out around um 15 or so, and I witnessed the awful like bullying that happened to a lot of them. So I naturally, what was typical in the family as well is to just shut down or sweep things under the carpet at the time. But then to top it off, as soon as I left school to college, my mom really devoted herself to Christianity and got baptized and everything. And I was like, no, what? Not now. Because then I was coming out and it just was a disaster. So I rebelled against it. I remember I got a piercing. I dyed my hair. It was like Fallout Boy years, you know. And I was just, I guess, sort of seeking some sort of community or belonging with trying to sort of make friends through MySpace and Facebook and at the college, and also seeing that there was an openly like trans girl at 16, like being fully herself in the college, not bullied and celebrated. And then I was like, I'm coming home and everything's wrong about me, and I have to shut this part of me down. And so you don't realize at the time, but it stings a lot later, and it can bring out anger in different ways or this feeling of rejection. And the process of sort of learning to um, accept that and then move forward from it without holding hostility towards certain people is definitely a process as well.
It's 100% a process. I still hold hostility to those people now because
Yeah,
even though, I hated the bullying, I mean, I was 15 when I joined the secondary school in sunny Ockenden in Essex, which my dad still lives there. I struggle to go back. It's not a happy place for me.
yeah,
Um, it's not home. It's not home. And when we
yeah,
talk about belonging, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but a feeling of displacement is something that I have regularly had to deal with and not
yeah,
and just not feeling like I belong. But even though the bullying continued, I still did things my way. I still embraced
yeah,
my individuality. I still did those rebellious things. And I wasn't even out yet, but I was dressing the way I wanted to. I
yeah.
dyed my hair like Ginger Spice style with kind of like,
Ah, nice.
bright
Yeah,
blonde bits here and ginger on the rest. Like even though I wasn't out and even though I was being bullied to hell, I still did those things because I wanted to do those things. And I had a decent set of friends, mainly girls. That's been a big thing throughout my life. It's kind of like the
yeah,
majority of my friends have been girls, and that shows up in how I show up now for gender equality and the women in my life, and constantly not
yeah,
just advocating them, but celebrating and being so grateful for their influence and being my biggest cheerleaders and me them.
yeah,
Um, but when I was 17, it was kind of like I went to college, I went to sixth form college, and I was just out. Once I'd came out, I was staying out, and I was really
yeah,
kind of celebrated. And anyone that did try and bully me at the sixth form, I was just like, nope, not having it. So it was just like reporting you,
yeah,
arguing back. I was like, I'm not taking this shit because I put up with being bullied for too long.
yeah, for sure.
I think when we think about we were chatting about ADHD, and I've read quite a lot recently about how a feeling of unfairness and injustice is very much central to people with
Yeah.
ADHD, and it's been a very prominent thing in my life to argue against injustice. I remember at a very young age, being 11, and arguing with my dad and his girlfriend about refugees. It was around the time that a lot of refugees were coming over from Bosnia, and very much like me, with no life experience and no real knowledge, arguing
Yeah.
with them, saying, but they're from war-torn countries.
Yeah.
Surely we have space for them here. Like, how can you think like that, that they're not welcome and stuff? So I think that I very much started fighting for other people who are very much considered the underdog.
Yeah.
And it's been a common theme in my life. To show up for other people because of what I went through. I think that experience shapes so much of what I put out there now.
Yeah, definitely. And I imagine as well, like after sixth form going on after that, suddenly when you're 18 and everything is kind of open and free, but when you've grown up in an environment where you've had to have so many different responsibilities so young, and a lot of the parts of your childhood you've kind of had to mask, or you thought maybe were wrong, and you've felt like this displacement with belonging, it can be difficult suddenly when you're 18. You can go out into the world, drink, go to gay parties and everything, and
Yeah,
it can be quite overwhelming sometimes. I mean, I know for me, the first time I snuck down to London, I went to heaven, but I
I loved
cried
it.
on the
I
way
know
back, like on
I've
the
listened to
train.
your story on
Yeah.
this, and I love that you did that. I can't say my first gay pub was heaven. It was actually Colours in Basildon, which again is an absolute shithole. But I mean, I came home with a hickey the next day, and a bit like I'm wearing now with a
Yeah.
high-necked top. I'm not hiding a hickey now, but then I was, and and it was like sneaking home. But I love that you did that, and you had the bravery to do that and to sneak home. And I can imagine the emotion that you felt when having listened to you talk about that before, because it's this whole, I want my life to just be this, but I can't access that right now.
Yeah, it's true. It's like you just get glimpses, and then it's sort of like as the years go on and you're only getting glimpses, it's like you're losing yourself, but you're trying to hold on to bits of yourself. And also going back to like childhood, like, we all at first have that sort of glow and things that we naturally are interested in. And
Yes.
it's like when things are told, no, that's wrong, or we need to see a therapist about this, but you're like, why? But I thought I was, even though I was different, going to therapists through school and hypnotists even, it's like, okay, I want to change everything about me. I remember like I would have a new look all the time. I was trying to fit in, but I always felt like I wasn't funny enough, or I wasn't
Mm.
able to, I felt socially awkward in situations like with groups. And so I would turn to, when it came to going out to gay places, I would drink a lot. And I would do that to feel more comfortable. But yeah, it's like even in those glimpses, I would end up wasted sometimes, like going out in the clubs in Birmingham or Manchester. And then I'd go home and it'd be like back to my straight life, like
Yeah.
nothing happened. And so it gets very confusing because there's so many moving parts. And I'm not sure how your experience was from sort of like uni age, like through late teens
Oh,
into early 20s.
and you know what? I actually didn't I just bailed. I left
Yeah,
home at 17 because I was just like, firstly, I just wasn't didn't feel home. Like I loved my
yeah,
dad, I loved that I lived with my dad, but we're very different. And you've got this proper blokey bloke,
yeah,
West Ham supporting dude, and then you've got me who's outwardly very queer and dresses in a way that my dad does not really approve of. And actually, throughout my childhood, as much as I didn't think my dad would accept me, there was never any pressure on me to be any different growing up on my dad's side, even though I was, probably quite effeminate, um, a bit creative, liked drawing. I wasn't into snooker or football or anything like that. There was never
yeah.
any pressure to conform, but you understand. I think firstly, you're different, but also you can see when your difference makes some people feel uncomfortable. And if
Yeah.
I'm really honest, like I think that my dad still doesn't, I love my dad so much. Unfortunately, my nan's no longer here. She passed when I first started at university, but I knew that I always had her unconditional love. And my nan
Yeah.
was one of my best friends in the world. And we used to go to the cinema on a
Oh,
weekly. And when I started sixth form, a fortnightly basis. And so when my nan passed, it was like it felt like the end of the world. And I knew that I always had that love, but
yeah.
I still knew that my difference made didn't wasn't always comfortable for my dad and for my brother, and probably still isn't to a point now, although I
Yeah.
feel loved and accepted. I'm still very much the black sheep, I'm still very much the one advocating
Yeah.
for the trans community, for refugees, for diversity, so we're still very very different. But I bailed. I was just like, I'm not having this. So I came out and then
Yeah.
swiftly moved into my own apartment. And that was at sixth form college. So I had a ball at sixth form college because I was just like,
Yeah.
there's no rules. I live
Yeah.
by myself. I had no one telling me what to do. It was bliss. And yeah, I love sixth form. I was there for 3 years because I fucked up my first year. And so decided, people take gap years, so I'm just going to spend an extra year at sixth
Yeah.
form college. And it kind of worked out. I found a bit of belonging at sixth form college. I was out, I
Yeah.
was loud, I was, lived by myself. Still had a good relationship with my dad. Um, Probably better because we weren't living together.
Yeah.
And yeah, so when by the time uni came round, I was just like, well, I've lived by myself, so uni wasn't anything new,
Yeah.
except I was in London. I went to
Yeah.
UCL, so I worked my arse off to get into UCL, and I was never the really, I was always quite studious and stuff, but I wasn't very confident, so couldn't really
Mm.
speak in front of people. And this is a big part of my story is overcoming my fear of public speaking and stuff.
Yeah.
But and wasn't the most academic person, but busted my ass to get in sixth form into university. And I was told by my careers people, you're never going to get into UCL. And I was like, fuck you, I'm going to
Yeah.
get
You're
into
like, I'm gonna,
UCL.
yeah.
And so nothing like telling someone that they can't do something to spur them on. So got
Yes.
into UCL. Now, the thing about that is I was a shit student. I hated studying.
Yeah.
But just for, I was the first person to go to university in my family, apart from my mum's mum, not going to talk about her, and who did it as an adult learner. So, first person to go to university, so had no reference point, had no one to kind of guide me through. People were proud that I was doing it, but no one really understood. And again, around that sense of understanding, because I come from a very kind of like working class background, dad
Yeah.
is a labourer, my brother the same. No one really understands the world of an events manager in my family or what I do, and certainly not
Yeah.
now. So there's that as a common thread as well, like being so different and what I'm doing in the world is so different. So no one really understood what uni was all about. And I didn't really work that hard because I was at university in central London. So I was out every night,
Yeah.
for most of my time at university. It was lucky if I went to lectures. I'd always turn up drunk for lectures. Particularly I was always in the student union at lunchtime drinking snake bites, often turbo
I
snake bites,
remember
actually,
snake
where
boats.
oh, I used to love them, and I'd do a turbo snake bite where you put a double vodka in it as well.
Yeah.
And so I was just hammered for the whole time at university, and so yeah, just this wild sense of freedom, and being able to just be queer. And we're talking
Yeah.
about the early 2000s, where I often talk about this when I talk about the queer scene. London just felt a lot more open then and inclusive. When you look at
Yeah.
the queer scene now, it's actually typically built for white cis gay men.
Yeah.
But actually, back then, you had loads more lesbian bars. I had quite a lot of lesbian friends, so I was always in
Yeah.
lesbian bars. You had a lot more alternative places, so like Trash Palace and Ghetto and Pop Stars.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing. And you look at it now, and it's, I think the queer scene's a shadow of what it was back in the early noughties. I absolutely loved it, and I was just
Yeah.
having the time of my life. And but I in the there was always stuff going on. So bouts of depression. I was in quite a toxic relationship. So my first boyfriend wasn't really out following a toxic relationship that he'd been in. So that was going on through the whole time of university. And then I got into a long distance relationship with someone in Spain. So it was kind of like all these really kind of like dramatic situations that I kind of like
Yeah.
found myself in. And with that came various bouts of depression.
Mm.
And I just don't feel like I look back at that time and it's so hazy. It's so hazy. And then when I
Yeah.
finished university and started in the world of work, um, I started off as a receptionist actually for a UK cancer charity. Did a couple of years in the charity sector and then found myself at Macmillan Cancer Support, which is where I met this wonderful woman, Shanali. She's one of the biggest influences on my life, and she gave me my first big break in the events industry. And so I found
That's
myself in
awesome.
event management.
Yeah.
But through all of that, it's just such a hazy period through my 20s and my early 30s because drugs, alcohol, I found
Yeah.
myself living and working in a pub where I first got introduced to drugs. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't have an addiction or recovery story, but what I do have is an absolute passion for discovering sober life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back 5.5 years ago now. Um, and I often talk about how my drinking and drug taking was so much fun. Um,
Yeah.
so much fun. I had the funniest times, and I've made lifelong friends from those moments. And my friendship group has much dwindled, like many people's. But the
Mm.
friends I have now are mostly the friends I met through those times,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
through being out in the world of work. But I think that when I think about my story and the relationship with toxic relationship with my mum and over the years becoming there would be vast periods where we had nothing to do with each other. We'd fall out. There'd be a fallout. Wouldn't speak for a few years. We'd rekindle.
Yeah.
There was times when that really impacted me, and because I'd never really dealt with the impact that it had had on me, and everything was just a haze because nothing was ever clear because I was always wasted.
Yeah.
Always. It wasn't an addiction, but it was definitely a habit. And one of my when I talk about sobriety, I often say, whilst I didn't have a problem with drugs and alcohol, my drug and alcohol intake was problematic. And it
Yeah.
definitely showed up in work productivity, relationships, my own understanding of myself and my self-awareness. And
Yeah.
it hindered my progress and where I was getting to in life. So
Yeah.
that's been a massive shift for me is moving on from that. The world of work would be so different right now for me. I'd probably be further ahead in my career if I hadn't been such a wreckhead. But you live and you learn, and
Yeah.
I
It's so
and I
true.
think that one of the things I often say when I talk about, making smarter decisions is, firstly, I wish that someone had told me there was another way. I grew
Yeah.
up in and out. I grew up, as much as I had a loving home with my dad, we were always in like the kind of almost the equivalent of the British Legion, so community centres, grew up in
Yeah.
pubs and stuff. So drinking I used to get drunk at 15 at secondary school and go to class drunk. And so drinking was
Yeah.
always such a big thing. And so it was so normal. And I guess you grow up and you learn, right? But I think if someone had said to me, there's another way, have you thought about your career? Have you thought about saving for a mortgage? Have you thought about your pension? But no one took
Yeah.
the time. I think the boomers, as much as they
Mhm.
had quite a lot of information passed down, they
Yeah.
didn't take the time to pass it down to us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true.
Right. And there was no education about these things. So even if someone had said to me there's that, did you know there's another way, Neil? Like, have you thought about this? Have
Yeah.
you thought about maybe like taking this a bit seriously? High chances are I probably, with my rebellious nature, would have told them to fuck off
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
don't like being told what to do, still don't.
Yeah.
But
Same.
I wish someone had maybe made the effort to at least try. I think there was possibly a couple of people that tried to gently steer me, but I wish that someone had actually sat me down and said, "This isn't cool."
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can relate a lot. Because I really feel, especially because I moved to Madrid at 25, but my 25 felt like an 18 in a weird way because that was when I finally got the freedom. But I remember I moved, it sounds ridiculous, but I moved into my apartment. I didn't know how to use the washing machine. I remember phoning my mom, like simple things like that, but I'd never planned. And then meet a lot of friends and they were established in their careers and already had a clear idea of everything. And it was like very things that should have been simple that well not simple but I should have had under control by 25. I was like, I don't care, I just want to go out into the gay world and
Yeah,
party and be myself, and I'll figure that out later. And then I remember when I got with my ex, he's like, you're not even registered with a doctor, you're not even you're not even all these things I just didn't think about when I went to Madrid because I felt like I was making up for so much lost time. I was like, I have to pack in 7 years of sort of lost time, if that makes sense. And so I just go out. And I was someone that knew how to not drink. Like it was very easy for me not to drink, but once I would have a drink, it could never just be one or two, like socially. It had
same.
to bleed into a night that would go off the rails, and I'd not remember how I'd get home sometimes. And then my friends would show me, it was usually like funny videos, like the first things,
Funny,
yeah,
funny. Yeah, yeah.
like in a sort of cringe sort of way, but there wasn't sort of a darkness around it that I felt then, so I never took it seriously. But looking back, it was like I was drinking way too much. Like
Yeah.
even, and the British, we love to pre-drink before going out. So I'd pre-drink, and in Spain, the clubs would open at like 1, 2 a.m. So if you imagine in the UK, maybe 9, 10 o'clock, we're already starting drinking or drunk. And then I'd carry on and be out wasted by like 1, 2 in the morning and continue out until 6. I don't know how I did it because I used to do it maybe 3 or 4 nights a week as well.
Yeah, it's mad. It's mad what you can put your body through. And my drinking would often start on a Thursday, and then we'd go out on a Friday, and I'd get myself onto all the guest lists for the whole weekend. And that
Yeah.
was in the clubbing days. But then when we slipped into kind of like it would be at home, and we'd have kind of like constant parties and chill outs at home and stuff. It was very much kind of like cyclical, same thing. And actually, eventually, I just got bored of it, and that was the reason for me
Yeah.
deciding to take a break. It was never meant to be forever. I still have never said forever with regards to not drinking.
Yeah.
But I ditched smoking, drinking, and drugs all at once because it was the easiest way for me because they very much snowballed into each other.
Yeah.
And it's been over 5.5 years now, and I there was definitely some dark times and there were some stupid times where I put myself at risk, and I'm actually quite a risk averse person. So I look back at some of those times and think, oh my God, what were you thinking? Like, what
Yeah.
were other people thinking? And I look at myself now and just such a more present person. I know myself so much better. I've always been quite
Yeah.
self-aware, but I know myself so much better. But we go into regression mode, right? Because we're
Yes.
not able to have normal. There's a lot of theory around this, around, we're not able to have those normal experiences as queer people. You don't get
Yeah.
that first queer relationship early. The joy of Heartstoppers, when I was watching that is firstly, I
Um,
really resented and hated it because it was really mushy. And then I realized actually I'm
yeah.
only thinking this because I never got to live that myself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you do regress, but I find that my sobriety has given me so much clarity and ability to piece things together. So
Yeah.
now when I do have a mental health dip, when I experienced burnout last year, yes, it was absolutely awful, and it took me months to recover. But
Yeah.
I don't know how I would have recovered if I was still drinking and taking drugs during that period.
Yeah.
So it has changed my life, and not that I look back at a lot of my drinking escapades with fondness, and it's so funny, and I love reflecting
Yeah.
because it had some great cracking times. But
Yeah.
actually, I'm a different person now, and I've still got a lot of friends that, do that. No judgment here. Like everyone, with sobriety, we're going alcohol free or even moderating, because I do believe that some people can successfully moderate. I was
Yeah.
like you, it was never one or two. I actually didn't see the point in having one or two. I'd never have a
Yeah.
glass of
Same.
wine. I'd never have just a glass of wine at home with dinner. It would always be with the intent of getting absolutely smashed.
Yeah.
So I
Same.
never, yeah, I just didn't see the point. But life has just become so much easier. And I touched on it earlier, but I was always afraid of public speaking. I wasn't at university, even asked being asked to read chapters at school or verses, I would be scared. Now, as a kid, I used to love being in school plays, right? I used
Yeah,
to
yeah.
absolutely love being in school plays. I remember playing Scrooge and absolutely having the time of my life when I was like 10.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I still remember the songs now and always putting myself forward for that. And then at
Yeah.
some point, my shyness, probably because I was policing my body, my voice as a queer person, I
Yeah.
went into myself and didn't like being in front of people. I just wanted to go unnoticed.
Yeah.
Now I do not want to go fucking unnoticed. I want people to know who I am
Yeah. It's
and
the
but
best
that
feeling.
came with my sobriety. That came with learning to like myself. It came with learning to know what I was confident at and what I was capable of and pushing myself. And now, I'm a freelance MC. I am a public speaker. I host a podcast. I often give like talks on things like, male allyship, white allyship, LGBTQ plus inclusion. Um, but none of that would have happened had I given up drinking. And
Yeah.
because I decided to overcome my anxiety. So from what started as hosting an International Women's Day event, in a previous role because of my love of gender equality and wanting to show
Yeah.
up for the women in my life, through to hosting award ceremonies of 450 people.
Yeah.
This has all snowballed from my sobriety, and it's just given me capacity, clarity, and a lot of self-awareness. And I like what I put out there. Don't get me wrong, like everyone, I'm still very capable of being an absolute arsehole. But I've
Yeah.
not got an excuse for it now.
Yeah, but I think it's so true. Like because these elements of when we were children are sort of seen as we grow up as maybe being taught to us as wrong or rejected, that we do build a wall up. And so when it comes to things like public speaking and I'm not sure for you, but your first public speaking event, what it was like. I only did mine last month, and I was so nervous for it, like because I even remember saying and talking with my friends before, I was like, I'm gonna need to have a drink or two before. And they said, if you set that as the president, then you're always gonna rely on that as a crutch. So I just did it fully as myself. And then afterwards I felt so much relief and better. And like I was like, okay, yeah, I can do this, and I
Did
don't
you
have
enjoy
to put on
it?
some sort of mask. And so I managed to do the whole speech without touching a drop because I was saying in the days prior, like, I need a shot of tequila or something before you're on stage.
Yeah.
In the end, it started off a little panicky, I admit, but I'm not sure if you, I always feel like I will remember that day because it was my first like proper big speech. And I'm not sure for you if you remember like
I
very
remember,
first.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember everything about it. And I just remember there being so much love in the room because it was
Yeah.
it was a
So
250 person audience. It was an International Women's Day event focusing on banter or oppression, casual
yeah.
sexism or misogyny, right? And it was an event that I'd crafted. I'd sourced the speakers. I'd curated this event, and it
Yeah.
was a room. There was a lot of people I knew in that room, and a lot of people who loved, and a lot of people. So I gave the
Yeah.
intro to the event and compared it, and those nerves were insane. My voice was a bit shaky.
Yeah.
But I ultimately, what I'd encourage everyone to know is that most people in a room, when if you're giving public speaking a try, most people in the room are willing you on. They want
Yeah.
you to
So true.
succeed, right? They
Yeah.
and they're not looking for you slipping up. I stutter sometimes a little bit in my words.
Yeah.
I used to go really bright red. Like I never used to be able to stand in front of an audience without going bright red. And then afterwards, I'd need to run into a dark room and kind of calm down for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah.
That feeling is still sometimes there. My nerves don't kick in until about 5 minutes before I'm due to go on stage. And that might be a small webinar through to a massive event. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
still remember that moment, and my voice was shaky. But I had the back row was full of some of my best friends in the world,
Oh,
and
so
they were
nice.
really, really cheering for me, and it was just such a joyful feeling. And then when I did that first one, I wanted to do more. I'm really proud that you were able to just go for it without that shot of tequila. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, and I think afterwards there was so much love in the room, and so many people came up relating to my story because I spoke a little bit about the podcast, but I kind of spoke a lot about my story, and so many people came up and gave me a hug, or they were like, I have. There were a lot of people there for their first event as well, and a lot of parents even that came to that event, and they were like, "Oh, your story was really." Inspiration for I've got like a daughter going through something right now, or even a grandmother. Like there was a mother and a grandmother, and they were there. I'm not sure how they'd found the event, but they were there just to kind of be more so they could get the ideas of being more supportive towards their daughter. And so I had all this love, and for me it was not something I was used to, I think, because in the past always I built up the idea like before that I was gonna stutter on stage or do something embarrassing. And I did. I kept moving the microphone away from my, and everyone was laughing at that, but I turned it into a joke. And by the end, I just felt so much warmth and love in the room because
Good.
everyone go into these events. And this is why I always encourage people to go, and Barcelona has so many of them and London too, that everyone there is there because they really want to be part of this community and warmth, and they're going with the intention of really wanting to listen to everyone's story and support each other. So it's such a loving place. And because we've felt maybe displaced in the past and not been so loving to ourselves, sometimes it can feel overwhelming to receive that sort of positive feedback. But when you lean into it, I think it's so rewarding because it gives you, for future speeches and as you go on, a lot more confidence. But the first time, yeah, I was biting my nails 5 minutes before.
Yeah, that's normal. That's,
Yeah,
that's so normal. And as someone that's been doing public speaking, it's been over 5 years now since that first one.
yeah,
Um, it's been able to tap into that. But I think we've all got a story, right? And our stories
yeah,
can be so powerful. They can bring comfort to others, they can bring reassurance, and they can
yeah,
bring community. And so what I'd say to everyone is it's about learning to own your story,
yeah,
and reframing those parts, because sometimes when we look back at our story, they can be laced with so much shame and so much
yeah,
guilt, and just getting to a point of self-acceptance, and sometimes if you need it,
yeah.
self-forgiveness,
Yeah, that's very important too.
and finding your belonging in your story, because sometimes our belonging doesn't exist in the
Yeah,
places where it should, right? Sometimes we
yeah,
don't feel belonging at home or at school. So it's feeling belonging in yourself and in your own body and in your own mind. I think that I have got to. I'm married, and I often thought that it would be marriage that fixed me, and actually it wasn't. I think I craved stability, and I thought that marriage would give me that. Thanks, Disney.
yeah,
But
yeah,
actually, and yes, I have a very comfy home, and I've got the most amazing friends around me. I love the family that I do speak to.
yeah,
Um, but what has given me the biggest sense of belonging is and helped me through those moments where I struggled with my mental health is getting to know who I am, finding
yeah,
belonging in my own head, in my own body,
yeah,
working through body and image issues, which so many of us queer people have,
yeah,
through to having to police our voices and our bodies and the way we are, through to finding love for that. I find that being a podcast host myself, you
yeah.
have to get over the way you sound, right? You have to lose
Oh,
that
yeah,
fear of I don't like the way I speak. Um, and actually finding comfort in that and learning to like. And if there's something you don't like about yourself, if you can and if you want to, change it. But actually learning to like yourself and finding your own sense of belonging in who you are, because we so often experience displacement. We can be in a, we all know we can be in a room full of people and feel lonely. So I think,
yeah, yeah,
I would say that get to know yourself, own your story, reframe your story, and know that what you're putting out there will be of comfort and of reassurance to someone out there.
yeah. I think that's really good advice. And I think being kind to yourself and practicing forgiveness with yourself is really important too, because before I would be someone, if I'm, especially because I went through a very dark time through COVID, I felt the pressure to sort of, even though I wasn't mentally doing better, to appear like I was.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I'm like, if I mess up, I'm like, I'll just tell my friends, family, I'm like, look, this
Yeah.
happened, but I'm not going to punish myself over it. I can
Yeah.
only move forward.
Yeah.
And I
People
think when
love
you
you.
get to
People
that
love you.
place, yeah, I think
People
when you
love
get to
you.
that place, it's like it's a major sort of milestone because we often grow up with this negative voice in the back of our heads. And when you learn to, there's always going to be a part of it that tries to creep in, but when you learn to sort of try and switch it off and be like, no, I'm just going to move forward from this. This happened. I can't do anything about it. I can only go forward. It becomes a lot less of a burden.
Absolutely. Let it go. Let other people support you and lift you up when you need to. It's something I struggle with, as someone that is fiercely independent to my own detriment. I've learned actually when I need support, particularly with anyone that's experiencing burnout, do lean on the people around you because they want to support you. But also know that you will get through it. Like know that you will get
Yeah.
through it. When you look back, it won't seem like as big a deal. But yeah, know what you're capable of, and learning to accept and love yourself
Yeah.
is so key to that. And prioritize yourself. Please,
Yes.
like anyone
Yes.
listening that's struggling with it, prioritize yourself. I go back to what I said. For me, self-care and me time is no longer a nice to have. It's an absolute priority because I
Yeah.
can't tap into the joy and I can't show up for other people and the big issues if you're not looking after yourself. And I've learned that the
Yeah.
hard way. So yeah, do take care of yourself. You matter.
Yeah, it's so important. And in terms of the present day, so if you can, so I know you've got your podcast too, and we create
Yeah.
space. So if you can tell everyone a bit about what you're doing now, where we can find your podcast and everything about that, that'd be awesome as well.
So I host a podcast called Pause and Rewind, and just like Connor, I am shining a spotlight on queer people. I'm actually talking to those who are striving to make the world a more inclusive place, and it's
Yeah.
focusing on their origin stories, the
Yeah.
moments, the relationships, the realizations in their life that led them to who and where they are now, because everyone loves an origin story. So you can
Yes.
find that. You can follow me on Neil Hudson-Basing over on Instagram, or LinkedIn. I am also the founder of a queer-led sober clubbing event in London called the House of Happiness.
Ah,
We
nice.
set up back in October 2022 to help address the lack of queer sober spaces for
Yeah.
partying. So you can give us a follow at House of Happiness Official on Insta. Our next event is 7th of September. Grab your tickets over at thehouseofhappiness.co.uk, which is our shiny new website. And I work for 𝑨𝒏𝒅. So come to our community events and you will meet amazing people like ourselves.
Yes, yes. I saw you got a lot of webinars coming up
We
starting in
do. They're really
September as
great
well.
conversations. It's a queer living series, and we're starting with a really amazing topic, which is polyamory on the 17th
Yeah.
of September. So do visit We Create Space over on either Instagram or LinkedIn.
Yeah. So I think that'd be awesome. And thank you so much today for coming on the podcast and being so open and vulnerable, sharing your story as well.
So grateful for the opportunity. I love to chat, and I definitely look forward to seeing you soon, Connor.
Yes, thanks so much for coming on,
Che-
Neil. And so thanks everyone. We will be back with another episode of the Queerness Diaries next week. So everyone have a fantastic day. And yes, thank you so much, Neil. It was so great to have you on.
Loved it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ciao.